based on uniform intelligence assessments. The Russians were responsible for hacking the DNC.
The internet. A term so vague many of us don't seem to actually understand what it exactly means to us. As far as most people have heard it associated to being, it is just web pages you see on Google, when in reality the internet is far more integrated into our lives than you think. There is that tutorial watching YouTube, doom scrolling on TikTok, seeing and speaking with your family afar, or even those people you stay regularly in touch with which you have never even met in person. With all things comes its malign nature, and while you may think of weapons leading to existential threats being nukes or perhaps all our satellites crashing down on us, there is one quite literally in your hands. While all this now sounds apocalyptic, this is a very real threat. We aren't just talking about malware which slows down your computer or even stolen credit card information. We are talking about the loss of critical infrastructure that keeps planes from falling to the ground, prevents the release of poisonous gas clouds through urban centers, oil and gas supplies being severed, loss of access to food and clean water, to even the complete annihilation of the financial system. This is the future of war, the rise of cyber warfare. Before I begin, I must mention that this video will be based off Richard Clarke's Cyber War, the Next Threat to National Security and What to Do About It, alongside other sources that will be cited. In 2012 came a major cyber attack on the Saudi Arabian oil company Aramco, which is on the likes of Apple when it comes to wealth, being valued at $2 trillion. The attack consisted of a form of malware known as a wiper, which is used to clear data by erasing the hard drive of a computer. How the malware was delivered was through a phishing email attack to an unnamed Aramco employee, which gave the attacks entry into the company's network. Giving direct user mode access to the hard drives then allows for identifying the location of all files in the infected computers to erasing them. The malware sends information regarding the files destroyed to the attacker, then overwrites erased files using corrupted data that prevents it from being recoverable. What the attackers used as the image of the burning US flag. The virus itself would come to be known as a sham, and it led to 30,000 hard drives of Aramco being damaged. What the company did to restore operations was use its large private fleet of aircraft with their plentiful funds to purchase much of the world's hard drives, which actually drove the price up. This was done to prevent oil prices being affected, and alongside this, gasoline resources were becoming scarce for the Saudi population 17 days after the attack. Now, although the group claiming responsibility was calling themselves the cutting sword of justice, it is believed that Iran was behind the attack, and the practice of using a separate group of proxy isn't uncommon either. It allows for plausible deniability which can protect the state from being accountable, and this is something other state actors utilize, most notably Russia and China. What this leads us next to then is why over the recent years cyber warfare has become so impactful. That being because of our cyber dependence. Cyber dependence is not about the percentage of homes with broadband or smartphones, but rather critical infrastructures from pipelines, supply chains, railways, or the power grid. This is through cyber-physical systems which are dependent upon network systems and have no real backup. The purpose behind such a move was for automation, allowing the computers to take over replaceable manual work. However, this in turn makes the very systems that we need to live our daily lives vulnerable to cyber attack. Backdoor is a covert method allowing for unauthorized entry into a network. The purpose behind it is after initial entry by a cyber attack, a backdoor is left behind to permit future access. This is something that the world powers have done to one another, like when China broke into a dozen oil and gas companies into the US in 2012. The FBI and Homeland Security designated the purpose as being, quote, that these intrusions were likely intended to gain strategic access to the ICS networks for future operations rather than for intellectual property theft. So in short, it was to gain leverage over the US by basically telling them we have a button that can turn off your critical infrastructure. However, the US is no stranger in doing the same either. In fact, all the way back in 1982, the CIA had performed an approved cyber attack by President Reagan in sabotaging Soviet critical infrastructure. It was to insert a software Trojan horse into computing equipment that the Soviet Union had bought from Canadian suppliers, used to control a Trans-Siberian gas pipeline. The docked software failed, leading to an explosion so large it could be seen from space. So cyber warfare isn't exactly something new. The CIA were playing around with it since the days of the Cold War. Now, when we think about this, what may come to mind is why militaries and intelligence agencies using what seems like purely commercial products in their covert operations, be it cyber espionage or full-blown cyber attacks. Well, the answer is the internet didn't even begin off as something for purely commercial purposes. The US Department of Defense started building a network of computers during the Cold War to keep defense leaders connected in case the Soviets ever decided to destroy communications infrastructures via satellite. What the DoD had developed was the Internet Protocol Suite, or TCP/IP, which is what creates actual networks out of computers which have a physical connection between them. What really commercialized the internet, or rather made it popular, was when an Englishman, Tim Berners-Lee, working at the European Organization for Nuclear Research, or CERN, created HTTP/HTTP HTML, which are the protocols for creating pages of information and linking them over the internet. While it was originally intended for sharing information between scientists around the world, it became more mainstream, and now the academia is just one of an endless amount of purposes for the internet. Now cyber attacks aren't the only move out there. Introducing cyber espionage. In 2007, someone had broken into data storage systems and downloaded terabytes worth of information related to none other than the development of America's most advanced fighter jet, the F-35. Well, the information they stole contained was related to the design of the aircraft and its electronic systems. Though the exact details of what was stolen is hard to identify, since hackers cover their tracks through encrypting the stolen information before exporting it. Pentagon officials believe with high certainty the intrusion could be traced back to an IP address in China, implying it was orchestrated by the Chinese government. What this predicament sets for us is the sudden potential for balancing of power, thanks to this new domain of warfare. So when you see those Chinese stealth fighters which look oddly similar to their American counterparts, know that it's thanks to the cyberspace. This too makes espionage as a whole completely different in nature. During the peak of the Cold War, when the protagonists would spy on one another for state secrets, they would have to create a physical presence by sending someone over to the other side. And this is no safe operation. A spy would be in constant danger through having his identity compromised, and they'd either end up in a high security prison until a prisoner swap if they got lucky, or not. Additionally, you could only carry so much intel with you, perhaps at most a handful of documents. With cyber espionage, both of these problems are defeated. For starters, you no longer even require physical presence in adversary territory, but instead be behind a computer screen. Traceability is also no longer a factor, since it's incredibly difficult to identify who your attacker even is, potentially even leading to the adversary attributing the attack to another nation. Additionally, while before you could only take so much as you could hold or remember, cyber espionage allows you to take literally terabytes of information which could be viewed as all 35 volumes of the Encyclopedia Britannica but 10 times over, something which would have certainly not been possible for a double spy to carry or let alone remember. This all means rather than needing to spend billions on R&D or research and development, you can spend far less for intellectual property first by building up a cyber force. However, hacking into your fighter jet's development program has more to it than just stealing the design. There is the fear that what China could have done was add a hidden program which causes the aircraft to malfunction in the air when it receives a certain command that could be radioed in from an enemy fighter. This isn't just a fear in military aircraft either, it's very much so a threat in the civilian sector too. Air France Flight 447 was a scheduled flight from Rio de Janeiro to Paris. The aircraft's computers were firing off messages back to the Air France headquarters computers without the pilots being involved. Due to inconsistent airspeed indications and miscommunication, the Airbus A330 began stalling to then crash into the Atlantic Ocean, leading to all 228 passengers and crew members to pass away. In modern fly-by-wire aircraft, onboard computers decide what signals to send to the control surfaces, meaning under certain circumstances, the software may even override the decision of the pilot to prevent manual controls from making the aircraft to stall or go out of control. Although the crash was unofficially caused by a cyber attack, it demonstrates that someone could very well on the ground using just the airline's own systems to create a data connection from the ground to the aircraft's computer networks, having the ability to take control of the aircraft. This therefore is just one example why securing a critical infrastructure which have become so reliant on industrial control systems that are cyber physical being prone to cyber attacks is in fact so crucial, and that it does affect us all. Now enough with the fear mongering. Let's go through what solutions there are to actually deterring these threats and gradually putting them away. One thing to first clarify, cyber arms control would not eliminate capability, but rather it would prohibit acts. The Cyber War Limitation Treaty could work by building a baseline of recognized international laws agreed upon by every UN member, which could be suited in cyberspace. A Cyber Risk Reduction Center could be established for exchanging information and providing nations with assistance, sort of like Interpol, which facilitates police cooperation and crime control across the world. There should be international laws obliging states to help out one another in cybersecurity, and cyber accountability should be tough in forcing nations to account. There should be international laws obliging states to help out one another in cybersecurity. Cyber accountability should be tough in forcing nations to account for cyber operations. Baselines such as forbidding first-use cyber attacks against civilian infrastructure would be a start, and prohibit all sides from placing backdoors on each other's critical infrastructure, with measures such as sanctions being used to enforce it. Altering data or damaging networks of financial institutions should internationally be recognized as illicit activity. These are just a few measures to name. Of course, there are plenty others out there and is still quite a recent interest. Having all this being said, what we can finish off with is that cyberspace can be both a utility used in your everyday life, be it for communicating with relatives abroad or automating physical systems, removing the need for manual labor there. With this also comes the undeniable fact that cyberspace could also be an existential threat that has the capability to cut off all our essential needs, from access to electricity needed for hospitals to run or clean water. Despite all this, the internet for certain has brought us an immeasurable amount, like the practically infinite amount of information within it, no longer requiring you to go on an expedition abroad for it. It has greatly shaped our lives and the trajectory of human civilizations to come, bringing all of us connectivity.